Welcome to Follow Your Curiosity, where we explore the inner workings of the creative process. I'm your host, Nancy Norbeck. Prolific author John Peel has written novels in universes from Doctor Who to Star Trek to James Bond. John started off writing fanfiction and, as you'll hear, is an advocate for fanfiction as a training ground for fiction writing. He tells me how he made the leap to writing authorized fiction, novels set in existing TV and movie universes, and how he approaches writing assignments and his relationships with editors. We also talk about the unexpected lessons his good friend Terry Nation, the creator of Doctor Who's Daleks, taught him about writing. John and his wife Nan have several chatty lovebirds, as you'll hear in the background. Here's my conversation with John Peel. Welcome to the podcast, John. I'm really excited to hear your story today.
Thank you for having me.
I am curious to know how you got your creative start. Did you write a lot as a child, or is it something that you came to later, or was there something else?
Well, it's the usual route. I wrote like crazy as a child. When I was very young, I had a very bad case of anemia. So I couldn't play sports or anything. I had to stay in when everybody else went out to play soccer and what have you. So since I was all on my own in the classroom and everything, I used to sit and read and write. And pretty much that's how everything started. I would just simply write stories. Usually continuations, obviously, of what I was reading. I would add the next chapter or whatever in what I thought was going to be happening. But yes, that's what happened. And then when I got over the anemia problem, I just kept going with the writing because I'd gotten so used to doing it and because I really enjoyed it.
Was there anybody who encouraged you to keep going? Did you show it to your teachers or anybody like that?
Not really. The closest I remember when I was 11, I had the teacher was a Mr. Fielding, and he was just amazing in his enthusiasm. I mean, I can remember we for example, we would read Robinson Crusoe as a class book. And he would jump around and make, all these little things, and he'd act it out. And he used to write little plays for us, very silly things usually, because of course that's what kids really enjoy. I remember very clearly we had one play we were doing, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves, and I was one of the 40, and we had this. He gave us this little song to sing, which was actually the Amble chorus, but I had no idea at the time. And it was a friend of mine, Chris Cook, and I were involved in these things. And it was open sesame, we brought a bag of riches, and then bow. And then open sesame, whoops, I've split me britches. And as a kid, that was hysterical. So. But he was very creative, and as a result of which, I think he fed our creativity. He didn't actually sit me down and say write stories or anything, but because of his enthusiasm for stories, I think it kind of seeped in, to my life.
Sure, good models will do that.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Whether they cross into being actual mentors or not, seeing somebody else do something gives us permission to do it ourselves.
Well, he made me realize that creativity could be fun. And that was a very important lesson, I think, to learn. That books could be fun, that creativity could be fun. And, just having fun was okay. It was a good thing to do. So, yes, I learned a lot from him in that direction, certainly.
Yeah, that's a message we don't hear nearly often enough, too.
No, I know. A lot of teachers seem to think, oh, well, I'll teach them, but they don't have to have any enthusiasm for it. They just have to learn the facts. And the fact that he was always, no, you've got to really get into this, that really helped me. And later on when I was in secondary school, it was not as clear. I had an English teacher who began as Miss Sharp, and then she got married and became Mrs. Newman. And she and I used to have terrible fights over poetry interpretation and things like this. And she would say, "Oh, this is what the poet means," and I would always say, "I don't think so." terribly conceited in that sense. Hasn't really gone away very much since. But we would argue. I remember specifically we were reading a poem, and it was about a train going into a tunnel. And she said, "Oh, this is a sexual reference." And I was like, no, guys just like trains. It's a guy thing, trains, So we used to have all these terrible fights, politely, but we completely disagreed with one another. I think she'd be very surprised to discover I became a writer, because she was convinced I'd end up being a total idiot.
I'm laughing in part because I think I had a few conversations like that with one of my English teachers back then too.
Oh, yes.
And,
yes.
If he hears this, he'll probably have a good laugh about it. But yeah, I'm reminded of the Isaac Asimov very, very short story called The Immortal Bard.
Oh, yes.
Where, someone is going on about knowing what Shakespeare was thinking, and Shakespeare comes back and sits down in this English professor's class and gets failed. And yeah, I don't think you can ever really know exactly what somebody else was thinking when they write something. You can only take your best guess, which can be fun, but you can't say you actually know.
No, I don't think so. So we used to disagree happily about it.
That actually sounds like it could have been a fun kind of relationship if you knew that you were going to have the argument, but that you weren't going to, hate each other afterwards or whatever.
Right. In fact, I remember one day she would read us short stories in class, and she read one day, and I said, "Oh, that's Ray Bradbury." And she was quite surprised. She said, "Oh, have you read it?" And I said, "No." I said, "I haven't actually read that one." And she said, "Well, how did you know it was Ray Bradbury?" I said, "Well, Ray Bradbury, you can't mistake his style. Ray Bradbury is Ray Bradbury." And she was amazed because she had never to that point thought that a science fiction writer could have style, unrecognizable style. She just thought it was silly kid stuff, And she was quite amazed that I recognized a Ray Bradbury without actually having read it first. So we taught each other, I think, in some ways. She was a very good teacher in many, many ways, but we just clashed over opinions.
I think that the best student-teacher relationships are the ones where both people are learning from each other.
Yeah, and I think it's very important. It's a bit of give and take. I mean, it's one of the things I always like is when I'm talking to people, you never know what you may learn. Even, especially from people who disagree with you, because quite often, I mean, if you just get people who agree with you, you never learn anything. Your mind doesn't expand at all. Whereas if you find someone who disagrees with you, if you discover they have a good reason for disagreeing with you, maybe you'll learn something from them. I know. I mean, people who've said, had an opinion completely different to mine, and I've said, "Well, why do you think that?" And then we talk, and then I start seeing it from their perspective. I mean, I remember doing that very clearly with Terry Nation when I was working with Terry, and I mean, he did a lot of things that I thought were kind of silly, and I sort of said, "Well, why did you do this?" And then he would say, "Well, John, you have to remember, especially when you're writing for television, for example, you're not just writing for one person. You're writing for a range. So it's good to give people of different ages and backgrounds something that they might recognize in there somewhere. so that you're speaking not just to yourself and not just to one kind of little facet of the audience, but you're speaking to a broader group. And when he said that, it made me think about it, and I realized, what he was doing was actually much more sophisticated than I thought he was doing, and it was interesting to find that.
Sure. Yeah, that's not something that you would necessarily expect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember one of the things was he came up with a planet name called Iridius, because it's a desert world. And I sort of said, well, that's a bit silly name. And he said, no, John, you have to remember, somewhere out there's going to be a child watching this story who is going to have learned the word, and it'll be a big word for him, and it'll be something new. And then if he sees it in a story, it'll bring home to him that things he learns can be used and will be showing, turning up again, which I hadn't even thought about. I mean, I just thought, oh, it's a bit of a silly name. But I saw, then he explained why he did it, and then it made more sense to me. So I was learning from him, why he was doing certain things, and it was very instructive.
Sounds like it. And I want to get back to Terry Nation, but before then, I want to get the bridge in there of how you went from school into ending up writing. When did you start to think maybe this was something you could actually make money doing?
Well, I used to write stories and then read them to my kid brother and sister at bedtime. And they always had a great deal of fun with the stories. They enjoyed them. And I thought, well, okay, let me try it. And I naively wrote a story and sent it off to Penguin Books. And Penguin wrote back very nicely and sent the story back. And they said, we don't get stories like that. You have to come to us through an agent. But if you can find an agent to submit it, we'll read your story. Which, of course, I was 17, 18 at the time, I think, and I had no idea how you went around doing this. I mean, it was not something that anyone I had known had ever done. So I had no clue how to actually get into writing as a job. What I used to do was I wrote fan fiction for Doctor Who mostly, and that was a good practice. It's a good way of getting into writing fan fiction, I've always found, because you have to discipline yourself to write the characters that someone else has created, and you have to make them so that when other people read the story, they can see the characters, and they can say, yes, that's Doctor Who, or yes, that's Star Trek, or whatever. But you have to have a certain amount of self-control to do this. And I'd been doing this for a while, and then they began publishing a magazine in England called Doctor Who Weekly. And at a convention, I met the editor, and I got up enough nerve to go up and say, look, I've got some ideas for stories. Can I send them to you? And he said, yeah, okay, I can always do with some new stories. Send me a couple and we'll see. And I sent him a little batch of ideas, and he liked them. And he said, okay, let's go with it. You write me the first one up as a plot. And he showed me how to do the outline and everything to write a comic strip. And it was going to be a 4-page story. So he explained how to do this and how to do that. And the first one, of course, he had to rewrite a fair amount to get it in the right format, because, as I say, I'd never written anything like this before. I'd written stories, but comic stories are a completely different kettle of fish. You're really writing for the artist, mm-hmm. so that the artist will get inspired by what you've written and draw the story. So I managed to do this. I ended up doing 4 backup strips, 4-page backup strips for him. And that was incredible for me. Not just simply selling the material, but seeing how an artist would take my impressions, because I mean, I see what I write as kind of like a little movie in my head or a little TV screen, and I write it down. And of course, when he gets it, he looks at it, and he's seeing something in his own experience from this. So, you know, I would send in the story thinking, oh, this is going to look like this, look, you know, like that. And it doesn't, because the artist interprets it his way. So I had a huge amount of fun from that, just seeing how that they took my story and brought it to life. That was really how I got my start with those 4 short stories. And that was about the same time. In fact, I was moving in the process of moving to America from England. So I was actually sold stories back to England from America, which was peculiar because earlier I'd been writing articles for a magazine in America, which I was sending them from England. So I kind of reversed tracks on everything. It was very bizarre. And it was all, you know, developed from this. It was kind of, I really didn't know what I was doing. I was just exploring it and experimenting constantly at the time. And it was fun and it was scary at the same time.
Do you think that there's merit, or maybe merit is not the right word? I can see where it's really helpful when you want to get started knowing this is what I need to do and these are the kinds of people that I need to talk to and all of that. But right. I can also see where not knowing might free you up to not only experiment, but make mistakes and stumble into things that maybe you wouldn't have stumbled into otherwise. And I'm wondering, you know, obviously you only have experience with one side of that coin as starting out, but do you have a read on that?
I think a lot of the time when I began writing, I kept stumbling into things, mostly because, as I say, I had no clue what I was doing. I just knew that I wanted to write, and I wanted to get into it any way I could. So I stumbled in by writing these little articles for this American magazine about English TV. And I stumbled again when I came in with the comic strips. So, I mean, I was really sort of feeling my way, and I had nothing to go on. I didn't know any other writers. I had never met any other writers. I was doing all of this on my own in a tiny little enclave of my own, I guess. And I kept experimenting and pushing and seeing if I could get people interested. And I was very fortunate at the beginning in that I actually found some people who had a certain amount of sympathy for me, I think. I mean, when I was over here, I wanted to write novels. So I started writing one as a sample, and I sent it in to this lady called Olga Litowinski. And Olga worked for, oh goodness, who did she work for? one of the major publishers anyway. And she read the couple of chapters I sent her in the outline, and she wrote back to me and said, look, John, this isn't right. This isn't going to work as a story. However, there's a germ of a good story in there. So what I need you to do is to take it again and start it again, but do it like this. And she encouraged me with this, and I did what she suggested and sent her a couple of chapters, and she said, right, you got it. Let's go with the story. And I was incredibly fortunate because this was before I'd gotten an agent or anything. And I mean, you can't do that. You don't do that because you have to have the agent to go through to sell the stories. And Olga just took pity on me, and she thought that I had a measure of talent and that she was going to foster it. So I really lucked out there by doing the whole wrong thing. And then she said, get an agent. So because I had already got a book sale pending, I actually found an agent what happened was I looked in the Writers and Artists Yearbook, which lists agents, and I thought, well, everybody's going to start at A. So I went to the back and started from the back. And I found an agent that looked like she was doing, she was handling the kind of material that I like to write. So I wrote to her, and she liked what I wrote and everything. And she took me on, and she was my agent for 35 years.
Wow.
About 35 years, I think, quite a long time. And she always believed in me, which was terrific. I mean, that's what you need, is people who believe in you. And she always helped me in that aspect of things. But again, as I say, I was doing everything the wrong way. This is not how you're supposed to become a writer. I took no college classes. I took nothing special for writing or anything. I just had that impetus. I wanted to write, and I was determined to tell stories, and I'd do it whatever way I could think of. So it came out. As I say, I was very fortunate that I found the right people. Basically stumbled across them, but I was amazingly lucky with it.
I think that is so key from all of the people that I've spoken to. It makes such a huge difference to have someone in your corner, whether it's a parent or a teacher or an agent or whoever it is. And just for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, it is incredibly rare to get an editor to write back to you if you don't have an agent. It's well nigh on impossible. So that is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I never quite figured out why she did. But she saw something in it and decided she was going to, do something with me, and that was amazing. And as I say, I didn't realize at the time it was anything unusual, because I had no idea. It was only later that I realized, wow, how lucky I was to get the right person.
Absolutely.
And I mean, especially in writing, that it's so very, very difficult to get started. Because you have to have someone who believes in you and who will help you and guide you. And Olga did that a lot, because she taught me a lot about writing as I was writing the story for her. I mean, she would say, for example, you keep switching points of view. Stop that. Pick a person, stick with them. And things like this. I mean, she would give me very good advice. And at one point, when I finished the book, she said, chapters 8 and 9 don't work. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, they don't work. I said, well, what can I do? She said, change them. And I said, well, how would you like me to change them? And she said, you're the writer. You figure it out. Don't ask me. Go off and do it. And I went off and I looked at these chapters, and she was right. They didn't work in the context of the book. So I rewrote the 2 chapters, sent the new ones to her, and she said, that's it. You figured it out. But I mean, she would not tell me exactly what to do. She would just simply say, this isn't working. Do it again, kind of thing. So, I mean, I learned a lot from her, but in odd kind of ways, because that was the way she was. And that ended up actually not. It didn't turn out to be my first published novel, because it was going to be in a hardcover, and we spent about a year and a half working through all of this stuff. So as a result of which, it ended up being my second novel. My first novel ended up being The Chase with Terry Nation. So that kind of hopped over the first book. But again, that was another purely accidental thing, which is where Terry Nation comes back in again into the story. I'd been contacted by St. Martin's Press. They were interested in doing a Doctor Who book to cash in on the show's popularity at the time. That was when it had just really started getting big in America. and they had these ideas for books, and the editor honestly didn't know Doctor Who, so he called me up and he said, look, can I run these ideas past you? And they were terrible. I mean, really awful ideas. And I told him so. And he said, well, we really want to do a Doctor Who book. Can you think of anything we could do? And I said, well, Terry Nation once wrote a book in England back in the 60s. And I think it could be updated and you could use that. And they said, oh, well, okay, great. Can you contact him and see if he's interested? So, all right. I had no idea at the time how to contact him, but I knew someone who knew him. So I contacted the person I knew and said, can you ask Terry for me if he'd be interested in talking about, doing this book again? And Terry said through her, okay, sure, give him my phone number and we'll talk. So I called Terry up and told him about this. And he said, well, I'm kind of busy at the minute, because he was working on MacGyver on TV at the time. And he said, do you think you could do the job of updating it? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? Then when I read it, I reread the book again, and I realized it would have to be completely rewritten, not just simply updated. And Terry was like, okay, well, are you okay for that? So I ended up doing a book with Terry. And partway through the book, while we were working together, Target Books contacted him because they were doing the Doctor Who novelizations. And Terry didn't like the last couple of ones they'd done of his stories, so he told them that was it, no more. But because it was the Daleks that were hugely popular, every couple of years they would call him up and say, please, Terry, can we do another Dalek story? So while we were doing this book together, they called Terry up and said, please, can we do another Dalek story? And Terry said, yes, you can, on one condition, that John Peel writes it. And I know nothing about this. This was going on without my knowledge. And a couple of days later, he called me up and said to me, John, would you like to write a novel? And I said, yeah, sure, why? And he said, well, I told Target Books that you'll do it. So that was how the Chase novelization came about. He completely set the whole thing up. I mean, I had nothing to do with it, even making the decision to do the book. It was entirely Terry. So again, I'd fallen in the right place at the right moment with the right person. And it was purely accidental, but Terry used to say to me, if an editor asks you, can you write whatever? Always say yes. Then go away and panic. But then sit down and do it. And that's what I did basically with the Chase. And I learned a lot from it because, in fact, I took on a lot of other jobs over the years that I wouldn't have considered doing, except, what Terry had said reminded me, well, let's try it. I mean, even if it's not something you think you can do, let's try it and see. I was contacted one time from a publisher, Workman Publishing. They wanted me to do a calendar. And I was like, how do you write a calendar? But I said, you know what? I'll have a go. And I did once. They asked me if I wanted to do it again the next year. I said, no. One. It drove me crazy. But I would try it because of what Terry had said. Give it a go. And I always did that. If anybody ever asked me, you want to do this? I always said, sure, let's try it. I mean, what can you lose from it? A bit of time, perhaps, and what have you, but you never know what will come from it. I've been very fortunate in that way, because I have that reputation. And it's gotten me quite a few jobs, actually, where people would say, oh, my gosh, we need a book very, very quickly. Who can we get? John. And they would call me up and say, can you do this book in however many days? And I would always say yes. It was kind of funny. I did a book one time, The Young Astronauts, and they needed it in an absolute emergency. They were doing this series of books, and they'd written book 1 and book 2. And then they decided that actually they needed a book 2 in between the 2 they got, because they jumped from in book 1 they get signed up as, these kids get signed up as astronauts, and in book 2 they were in space, and they thought we need something in between because they got to be trained and everything. So they had to do it very, very quickly. And a friend of mine who was doing book 4, they asked her if she could do this new book 2. And she said, no, I've got this one I'm doing already. I haven't got time to do it. But John Peel works really quickly. Maybe you should talk to him. So they called me up and I said, yeah, okay, I can do it. And then they said, well, it's got to take place in between book 1 and book 3, the new book 3. So it's all got to take place, basically, the end of book 1, they're blasting off into space, and then the new book 3, they arrive in space. So whatever you write, it's got to go in that gap in between. I said, yeah, okay. And then they said, and we've already got a cover painting, so you've got to fit that in your story. Yep, okay. And then they said to me, and it's got to be done in like 4 weeks. Can you manage that? And I said, yeah, okay. And then there's a pause, and they're saying, are you sure? And I said, yes, I'm sure. And I wrote an outline overnight and mailed it to them quickly. And they were thankful because I figured out a way of resolving everything. So, I mean, I got that job because I could literally jump in and just do it very quickly and everything, because I'd gotten the reputation of being a reliable person to go to. I mean, it's very good to be a brilliant writer, but it's far better from the publisher's point of view if you're a reliable writer. I remember going in to Tor Books one time, and I was talking to one of the editors there, and we were talking about some series they were doing because they had the books. Book 1 had been done, and they were ready with book 2, and book 3. The author had disappeared. He'd just gone off somewhere, and they couldn't contact him. And he was like a year and a half overdue on this book 3. I mean, a year and a half. And as you know, I'm sure, publishers have a schedule they have to keep to, which is why it's very important that you can deliver when you're supposed to deliver. And this guy was just throwing their schedule completely off. Everything, the production line was gone because they needed the manuscript to be able to do the next stage and everything. And he just vanished. So the editor was saying to me, he's a really, really good writer when he writes, but we will never, ever employ him again. Never. Because we can't deal with this. I mean, we have to have reliability. Mm-hmm. And that's why I kept getting jobs, because if I promised a story by June, you'd have it, usually by May. I always like to turn things early if I can, because, again, it makes people very happy with you when they've got a deadline. If you suddenly give them 4 extra weeks they weren't expecting, it makes their job happier. So that's the way I always tried to work with an editor, was give him what he wanted, but preferably a little earlier than he wanted it, so that he had, if there was a problem, he had a few weeks to be able to deal with it. You know, for the duration of my career, that was really what I was aiming to do, is to always make the editor happy. I mean, I hope I make the readers happy, but you don't know that. I mean, you can't know that until the book comes out. You can hope it's going to make people very happy, but certainly you'll know whether you make your editor happy or not, because he'll tell you, or she will tell you. And that's really the way to handle it, I think. You have to focus on not the audience, not anything else, but the editor. That is the one person you're going through. So that's the one you really got to keep happy. And I've always worked at doing that, thank goodness.
So it sounds to me, especially since you're able to put things together as quickly as you do, but also because you've mentioned coming up with an outline so quickly, it sounds to me like you are much more a plotter than a pantser. Is that correct?
Yeah. Basically what happens is if people... I always say that the most important thing about any book I write is that I have fun. Because if you have fun, you don't get writer's block because you're enjoying yourself. I mean, why would you get writer's block if you're having so much fun? And if it's something that I can have fun with, I have no problems in coming up with ideas. And I mean, quite often, in almost all of my cases, an editor will say, "Can you write me whatever?" And if it's something that I like, I can come up with an idea. I mean, for the whole story, for the whole novel, overnight, which I've done a lot of times. But it's a matter of it. As long as it sparks something in my imagination, I can do this. And it's really helpful when you work with one editor over several books, because they get to know what your imagination is like and everything. I had one editor, especially Craig Walker, who was at Scholastic, and Craig and I got along wonderfully. We had a great rapport, and he would know how to provoke me into writing a story. I remember very clearly one day he said to me, "John, can you write me Jane Eyre with dragons?" And he knew me, and he knew I would like that concept. And he was exactly right. I wrote the outline overnight, and he loved it. And I loved it. And it turned out to be the most popular book I've ever written. A story called The Secret of a Dragon Home. And I've had a lot of people say to me that when they read the book, generally as a teenager, it really, really affected them. They really felt strongly moved by the story, which is tremendous. I mean, I like that. I mean, I wasn't aiming for that exactly, because I was just aiming to tell a story that I enjoyed. And it turned out that it spoke to them in many ways. And it's still the most popular book I've written, I think. Not the most best-selling book. Those obviously were the Doctor Who books, because they had a built-in audience. But it was the one that people seem to remember the most and feel the most strongly connected to. And it was just because, as I say, it started when Craig said, "Can you write me Jane Eyre with dragons?" Because he knew what I would say. He knew how I would, react to this. And this was great, because I worked with Craig a lot. And he was a wonderful, wonderful editor. A lot of editors interfere. They will say, "Oh, well, you ought to write it like this. You should do that, whatever." Craig never did that. Craig would say, "I like that, go with it." And that would be it. And then we would have a discussion about the story. And then he would say, "What if you did this?" And it would usually be a very, very good idea, because he was that kind of a person. And he would suggest things. And we would have the most uproarious sessions, pitching stories back and forth to each other. I would come up with an idea, And then he would say, yeah, but what if you do this with it? And then we'd say, yeah, okay, good. And then he would call in someone from the art department and say, look, we've got this idea going. What do you think we could do about a cover for this? And I would be brought in on all of the angles. Nobody else ever did that. None of my other editors. But with Craig wanted me to be part of the whole process. So that was a great thing. And in many ways, writing books is a kind of collaborative effort, even when you're the only author, because you're working with the editor. Mm-hmm. And you have to have that rapport with an editor. And it makes things so much easier when you've got a really good editor. And I've been very, very fortunate in that I don't know how many editors I've worked with over the years, quite a lot. And I've only ever had one bad editor in the whole bunch. All of the others have been terrific. So again, I've been incredibly fortunate that I've actually gotten to talk to and work with people who understand the way my mind works and go with it. And you know, they're not controlling, they're not, but they are collaborative in that they will come up with ideas and say, okay, well, you could probably do that a little easier, because sometimes you don't think things quite right. I remember I was doing a Star Trek Deep Space Nine novel for young adults, and I'd written them into this terrific situation where they were high above the arcade and everything, in the girders up there and in the heights and everything, and there's this terrible danger that they're going to fall at any moment and, you know, fall 150 feet to their death kind of thing. And I got this all built up, and my editor Lisa at that point said to me, why don't they just use the transporter and get them down? And I was like, because I never thought of it. But you see, that's what a good editor will do. Mm-hmm. So all I had to do was say, the previous chapter, I just wrote a line in saying, you know, Captain, the transporters are down. We've got to do some maintenance. And that answered the question. But that was what I needed the editor for, because she saw a big plot hole that I hadn't seen. And that's why it's such a wonderful thing when you get editors that you can work with like that you can trust to have your back, basically, when you screw up, to tell you, no, we need to correct that. So it's always been collaborative for me in that sense. I've always had that rapport, and it's very important. Plus, of course, sometimes you come up with ideas that are really not as bright as you think they are. And you need someone to say, no, John, no, don't do that. And it has to be someone you can trust. It has to be someone who can tell you, no, don't do that, and know that you won't get upset with them, and know that you won't fight with them or kick and scream or anything. And that's why it's very important to have an editor that you trust, because they can do that. They can stop you from making mistakes, hopefully.
I think we all need to be saved from ourselves from time to time, and that is definitely the job of a good editor in any context. Whether you're writing fiction or press releases, you still need somebody in there.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, because you mentioned that you essentially started out as a kid writing fan fiction, and you have written in the universes of Doctor Who and Star Trek and James Bond and probably others that are escaping me just at the moment. And, you know, there's a line between fan fiction, which is done without any kind of copyright permission or anything, basically for the absolute love of it, and what you do when you're writing an actual novel for Doctor Who or James Bond or whatever. And I'm just curious because fan fiction, just for a start, often gets a bad rap. And, moving from one to the other, I'm curious to know what that process is like. Were you surprised that someone actually wanted you to write what's got a very thin line between it and
Hmm.
fan fiction and actually pay you for it? How does that work as well, like on the technical legal side?
Um, I started writing fan fiction. I mean, that's where I basically started most of my fiction writing. And I think, honestly, it's a great way of starting. It's not a great way of spending the rest of your life, but it's a good place to start because you have to learn to discipline yourself to fit in basically somebody else's universe. They created all the rules, they created the characters and everything, and you have to conform to that. So it's a good way of learning discipline so that when you have the chance to create something, you'll be able to do that and to stay consistent within your own creations. Um, and it's a good thing also because you get to, a lot of the time, there's the tendency of a writer to put themselves into the role of the main character. So that, Mary Sue stories basically
Mm-hmm.
they're called, where you are actually the main character. Whereas if you're writing fan fiction, you can't do that exactly. You can if you're bad, but if you're good, what you do is you have to conform to that person's character. So if you're writing a particular doctor, let's say the third Doctor, you have to write the character so that people can read it and say, "Oh yes, that's John Pertwee. I can see it's him and not Colin Baker." This sort of thing. You've got to learn to do it right, and in that sense, it can be a really good thing. But where it becomes a bad thing is when you don't go any further. You can't get stuck in it, but it's a good place to begin from, certainly. Um, in my case, I went basically almost overnight from writing fan fiction to writing authorized fiction. So it was a difference in size, I guess, basically, rather than quality. In the sense that I was writing a novel rather than a short story, and it was a different kind of feel to it, but it was basically the same kind of thing. I was still writing Doctor Who from the get go, and you have to be disciplined about it, but it's the same thing. And that was one of the good things about the Virgin New Adventures series when the show was off and the New Adventures were just filling in the gaps, waiting until maybe there would be a new Doctor Who. Was that they took a lot of fan writers and brought them into professional publishing. It was a great field because they knew that the fans would know the show and they would know the feel of it. And it gave a lot of people their first chance at writing. And a lot of the people who wrote those original Doctor Who novels went on to become professional writers. And this was their start. And that's a wonderful thing. So I'm very much in favor of fan fiction. I think it's a great idea. It's a great thing, but you can't stay with it. As long as you move on from that, it's a great passage. It's a great gateway. So, in fact, I ended up writing authorized fiction in fields that I'd never written in fan fiction for, simply because I enjoyed it so much. I do it. I mean, it is kind of like the same impetus. If I'm watching a show and I really like it, I'm always thinking, "Oh, I'd love to do a book about this, a novel based on this." And now and again I've been able to do that. Although I only ever chased two editors to actually ask, can I write in this world? All the others came to me, which was even more encouraging.
Sure.
I don't have to do the finding; they find me. But I went when I did a Quantum Leap novel. That was one where I really went to the editor and said, please, can I do one? And because I really loved the show and I wanted to write a Quantum Leap novel. And the editor, Ginger Buchanan, said to me, oh, yeah, sure, John, you've had enough experience. You know what you're doing. Send me a couple of ideas. And I sent her this wonderful, it was a brilliant idea. I loved it because I knew nobody would ever do something like this. And my idea was, you know Quantum Leap, I hope. Okay. Well, my idea was this. Chapter 1, Sam leaps into this cop. At the end of the chapter, he's shot dead. He's killed. And then we switch back to Quantum Leap, the project. And because he's been killed, they shut the project down. Everything's got a no-go. And Al and Sam's wife have to start it up in secret. And then she leaps back to save Sam. Ooh. And I thought, oh, what a great... I mean, they would never do that. But I thought this was such a great idea. She leaps back to save her husband without him knowing that it's her, of course. And I thought, and I sent her this idea and I said, how about this? And she goes, no, we cannot do this. People read these books because they love Sam, and he's not in this one. He's killed in chapter 1, and he's saved about 2/3 of the way through the book. He's not in it enough. You've got to do a different story. And I thought it was such a great idea too, but I would have loved to have done it.
I would have loved to have read it.
Because I just thought, when I'm asked to do these stories, I usually think, what can I do that nobody else will do? Because, I mean, the obvious stuff anybody will come up with. What I like to try and do is come up with something which is less obvious, something that takes it, twists it. When I did my first Star Trek novel, for example, that was the other one that I pitched purely because I loved the show, and it wasn't Star Trek. It was Alien Nation. They were doing Alien Nation novels, and I wanted to do one, and they said, okay, you can do one. And then the series got cancelled just as we were about to go to contract. So I never actually wrote that. But the editor said to me, sorry about that, John. Have you ever thought about doing a Star Trek story? So I said no, which was true. And of course, as is the case, as they say, excuse me. Overnight, I was thinking, well, if I did do a Star Trek, what would I do? And I came up with the idea overnight and called him up the next day and said, can I change my answer? And he liked the idea. But what I did with the idea was, I thought, what can I do that nobody else will do in Star Trek? And there was one firm rule about writing Star Trek, and that's no magic. Everything has to be scientific. So I thought, right, I want a book with dragons and magicians and everything you can't do in Star Trek, but it has to have a scientific answer at the end. There has to be a solid reason why it works like this. So that's what I did. I wanted to do the one thing that was forbidden, magic, and make it work. So he loved it. My editor loved it and bought it immediately on that basis. But that's kind of how I go about things. I like to. It's back to what I was saying. I like to have fun because I know if I'm having fun, I will never get writer's block. I will never get up in the morning going, oh God, another bloody chapter, you know. I will get up going, yay, I can't wait to get into this now, ready to type. And I think that's very, very, very important to have an enthusiasm for it. It's always got to be something that makes you feel uplifted, so that you really got that want, that desire to write, because there's nobody watching me. I mean, well, except something like this, of course. But nobody's watching me write. Nobody's there standing over me, going, right. You have to have that self-drive. And the best way is if you're really having so much fun, you don't want to stop. I mean, that's the best way for me, at least. That's how I enjoy it so much. And that's why I can I can write so much. It's because it's fun.
Absolutely. And I can't not, from my crazy little fangirl heart, sit here and think that the part of you that wants to do the thing you're not supposed to do and break the rules is the part of the Doctor that lives in you.
Yes, actually, it probably is. I hadn't thought about that one, but yes.
Yeah, it's that little bit of rebel that says,
yes.
You think I can't do this, but I'm going to anyway. Let me show you how.
Yes, I hadn't thought about that, but you're probably right. It's that little devil inside me saying, let's do this.
I think any of us who have spent any time, especially any significant time watching Doctor Who, have to have that little part that comes out somehow in that kind of way.
Yes. And I think a lot of it goes back to Tom Baker, because he always had that kind of childlike attitude. Let's do it. What's the worst that could happen? Let's do it. And I think that's a good lesson for any creative people. It is to say, well, let's see what we can do. Let's see how we can stretch it, how we can make it more fun, how we can, keep ourselves interested. Because you can, if you're reading a book, you can tell whether the author is actually having fun doing it, or whether they're doing it because they've signed a contract and they've got to write it. I mean, you can tell. You can tell that the enthusiasm is either there or it isn't. And I always want my stories to have that enthusiasm. So fingers crossed. It always will.
I agree. I have said many, many times, if you're not having fun with it, you're doing it wrong. And the more fun you're having with it, the more fun your readers, writers, viewers, audience of whatever kind is going to have in experiencing whatever it is that you've created. I think that's absolutely true.
Oh, yeah. And the one thing that I've discovered, having met a lot of the actors involved in these shows, is they are enjoying it. And they are, I mean, all you ever had to do was to see John Pertwee in action, and you would know that this was what he wanted. This was his love in his life. That Tom Baker, the same. They all have that thing, and they all had the sense to get out once the enthusiasm wasn't quite there anymore. When it was becoming a job instead of being also, huge fun. And that's why it's a good thing that we've had this turnover of actors for Doctor Who, for example, or the various layers of Star Trek, so that each 5 or 7 years they would reinvent themselves by looking at things from a different light. And this is good, because the creativity keeps flowing then, and the enthusiasm.
Yeah, it brings a whole new energy into things.
Oh yes. Yeah, very much so, and it's it's the same for me. I know. I mean, I enjoy things, and people will say, "Oh, John, can you do a story about so and so?" And going back to what Terry had said originally, yes, I can always do a story. What am I going to do? But then you get around to it. You're challenging yourself as well sometimes.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
Not at all. Not at all. Well, I cannot imagine a better note on which to end. So I think we will, but I have loved this conversation. Really appreciate hearing about your process, which is so very different than mine. So I always find it intriguing to hear how someone else works, since I'm
it's
basically allergic to outlines.
Yeah. Well, everybody does things differently, but there's always something in common in parts of it too. I mean, I remember I was talking to Joan Vinju one time, and I was talking about characters that we create that we just intend to use for like one chapter or something, and then all of a sudden you think, well, let's give him a bit of background. He's got to have a little bit of something to him, and then before you know it, they're in the rest of the book. Because, even though they weren't supposed to be. And I said this to Joan, and Joan said, "Oh God, John, I do that all the time." And so, I again, as I say, I really didn't know much about what was going on in other writers, but it's fun to see that they often have the same issues that I have. And I talk to them about how they deal with it and things, and it's intriguing. It's interesting.
It is. There are ways in which we all function differently, but an awful lot more ways, I think, that we all have in common that we don't realize, especially when we're feeling stuck and we think, there's something horribly wrong with me. Why did I ever say I wanted to be a writer or a dancer or a painter? What's wrong with me? I should go be, flip burgers or something. And it's not true. There's so much more that we have in common
Yes.
than we realize, which I think is probably the most amazing thing about it, that process can be so different, but so much the same all at the same time.
Yes, exactly.
So, well, thank you so much for sharing your time with me today and for all of your insights. It's a fascinating story.
Oh, you're quite welcome. I've had a lot of fun, as you can probably tell.
That's it for this week. My thanks to John Peel for joining me, and of course, I'm grateful to you for listening too. I talk to people all the time who are feeling totally lost, overwhelmed, and stuck creatively. And I know there are lots more of you out there who are feeling the same way. So I made something to help. Check out the link in your podcast app for my creative tune-up kit. It's $37, super affordable, and it's full of my favorite coaching tools to help you rediscover your creative self and make progress fast. I would love to get it into your hands so that you can get unstuck and create beautiful things this year. Follow Your Curiosity is produced by me, Nancy Norbeck, with music by Joseph McDade. If you like Follow Your Curiosity, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to tell your friends. It really helps me reach new listeners.